He is an economist and recently retired professor of economics at Western New England College and is currently visiting professor at John Jay College at the City University of New York. He is the author of numerous articles on economics. The book, Surrender, How the Clinton Administration Completed the Reagan Revolution. And he is a regular commentator on economic issues for Public Radio's WAMC. He is the elder son of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg and is co-author with Robert of We Are Your Sons, The Legacy of Ethel and Julius Rosenberg. Michael wants me to say that he has inherited his father's pedantry and treats the Rosenberg-Sobel case as an exercise in historical investigation. And let me just add parenthetically, I've seen him in many classes over the years, and he is an incredible instructor in stimulating students to think about the issues that are raised about this case as well as a variety of other issues.
I take off right where Miriam left off. On September 11th, 2008, Sam Roberts of the New York Times broke the story that Morty Sobel was reversing his decades-long assertion of complete innocence of any espionage charges. And then Roberts added the following: and he, Sobel, implicated his fellow defendant Julius Rosenberg in a conspiracy that delivered to the Soviets classified military and industrial information and what the American government described as the secret to the atomic bomb. Wondering about the last point, I called Morty, and he said my father had never told him anything about any of his other activities. In other words, Robert's statement was false. I suggested Morty try to clear that up. He subsequently wrote a letter, which thankfully the New York Times published, in which he stated he knew nothing about any of my father's other activities. Here's a direct quote: I want to make it clear that my only direct knowledge of Julius Rosenberg's activities on behalf of the Soviets during World War II, the activities I spoke with your reporter about, was what he and I did together. He never told me about anything else he was engaged in. Some readers of your article might assume I was corroborating the government's charge that the alleged espionage of David Greenglass was true, that I was implying that Julius had told me of his other activities. He never did. On September 16th, Roberts wrote an article about Robbie and me with the following headline: Father was a spy, sons conclude with regret. This headline is typical of the kind of treatment Rob and I have received since we went public in 1973. No matter how often we write what we think and believe, no matter how often we based our analysis on evidence and argument, everybody knows what we think because we're our parents' children. Because we love them, we cannot possibly be objective about them or what they did. And perhaps there are people in this room who believe that as well. We actually assert the opposite. Because of the political nature of the charges against our parents and the continuing political relevance of what happened to them as a result of government, prosecutorial, and judicial criminal misconduct, and as a result of the nationwide hysteria created around the case, we knew from the moment we stepped out of our anonymity, we had to force ourselves to deal as dispassionately and honestly with the evidence as we could. And contrary to the Roberts headline, we were not regretful. In many ways, we were pleased. We had long suspected that the evidence in the Venona decryptions were at least partially true. Rob said as much in his book, An Execution in the Family. I said as much in one of the extras on the DVD of my daughter Ivy's film, Heir to an Execution. But since Rob and I were dealing with the CIA and the FBI, masters of deception and disinformation, it seemed absurd for us to be the ones to validate their assertions, unless we were so certain that it was beyond a shadow of a doubt. That was why, from the time of the Venona decryption releases in 1995, we were careful to acknowledge that they might be accurate, but also recognize that there were uncertainties about some of the releases that might point to them having been cooked. We don't have that uncertainty anymore. I can speak for Rob when I say we are positive our father was engaged in military-industrial espionage during World War II in order to help the Soviet Union, which, despite efforts to hide that fact during the trial in the 1950s, was an important ally in the fight against Hitler. We also know that the government's case that he and our mother, through David Greenglass, had stolen the secret of the atom bomb was a total fraud. More on this when Rob speaks. Having shed our agnosticism, we can now speak directly to the issue of the crime committed by the U.S. government against our parents and the American left in general. And Rob will speak of the modern relevance of this. I would like to use the rest of my time to shift gears and ask a, hopefully not too pedantic, historian's question. Why were communist spies for the Soviet Union during World War II? Why were some communist spies? Some of you may know that Bill Williams, in his book, The Contours of American History, noted in passing that during World War II, some communists decided that the failure of the U.S. to fully share information with their supposed ally, the Soviet Union, was actually impeding the common effort to defeat Hitler, and therefore they gave information directly to the Soviets. In reviewing the book, Herbert Aptheker recoiled in horror from that assertion, suggesting it libeled the Rosenbergs and others. But Bill knew what he was talking about. He was talking about the exact same motivation that caused Jonathan Pollard to share information with Israel that he felt the U.S. was wrongly withholding. Now, many of us probably disagree with Jonathan Pollard's conclusion about the unity of interest between the U.S. and Israel, and we could debate his actions strenuously in this room and elsewhere. But whatever our judgment of what he did, we must agree that his motivation was to help Israel, not to harm the United States. And what would have been the motivation for dedicated American communists during World War II if given the opportunity to help out the Soviet Union? Because the government carried out the death sentences, we will never know about my father's specific motivations and what his self-reflection would have been had he been permitted to live into middle age and beyond. However, we do have the testimony of Theodore Alvin Hall, a man who at the age of 19 was brought to Los Alamos to work on the development of the A-bomb and who, together with his roommate Saville Sachs, decided to share whatever information he learned about the science behind the bomb with the Soviet Union. His motivation was very clearly laid out in the book Bombshell. And Annie and I had the pleasure of meeting and speaking with him in his Cambridge, England home once before he died. Ted made very clear that he believed that after winning the war against Hitler, it would be essential that the United States not be the only power in the world in possession